Good afternoon from Japan Pavilion at COP26 Glasgow in the UK, and welcome to our session entitled Nature-Based Solutions to Combat Climate Change and Their Diverse Benefits, which is organized by the Ministry of Environment, Japan. My name is Akane Matsuo. I'm a policy researcher at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies in Japan, and I'm very delighted to chair today's session. As you know, nature-based solutions, or NbS, have been gaining more attention recently, and of course here at the COP26. With that, this seminar will particularly illustrate the diverse benefits of NbS when they are implemented as climate change countermeasures. Today, we are very glad to have 8 speakers from various countries and sectors with us. The session is held hybrid, so 3 speakers are joining here at the Japan Pavilion, and 5 speakers are joining online from all over the world. And here, very excited to have so many audience at the Japan Pavilion. And of course, there are more audience attending online. So thank you very much for joining us today. The session first starts with brief presentations from each speaker, introducing their initiatives related to NbS, followed by the panel discussion exploring the further potential of NbS with their multi-benefits. We are all extremely lucky and privileged to be attending this potentially world-changing global climate event. But I am the lucky one because I'm not going to do any work. I'm going to be sitting over there with a cup of coffee while my speakers present their innovative nature-based solutions to climate change. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome our first delegate, Mr. Yutaka Shoda, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs, Ministry of the Environment, Japan, for delivering the opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shoda Yutaka, Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs at the Ministry of the Environment in Japan. Thank you for coming today to this important side event, Nature-Based Solutions to Combat Climate Change and Their Diverse Benefits. On behalf of the Ministry of the Environment, I'd like to say a few words at the outset. Nowadays, it is widely recognized that climate change is one of the most important issues, politically and economically, that needed to be addressed by the international community, and all of the nations need to strive towards the achievement of the 1.5-degree target, which mentioned in the Paris Agreement. The government of Japan has committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 46% in fiscal year 2030 from its fiscal year 2013 levels, setting an ambitious target which is aligned with the long-term goal of achieving net zero by 2050. Furthermore, Japan will continue strenuous efforts in its challenge to meet the lofty goal of cutting its emissions by 50%. And Japan has developed policy tools needed to achieve the target. Going forward, we will do our best to contribute to the world's transition to a decarbonized society with our technology and people, while also working towards the domestic decarbonization of Japan step by step. As we experience the impact of climate change, we must work on adaptation to climate change in a wide range of sectors. In Japan, the Climate Change Adaptation Act, an independent law for the promotion of adaptation, which is a rare thing in global terms, was established in 2018. Also, a new national adaptation plan was approved by the Cabinet on October 22nd, taking into account the assessment report on climate change impact in Japan, published in December 2020. Under the Climate Change Adaptation Act, we advanced climate change adaptation measures in collaboration with stakeholders. Japan is also focusing on capacity development of policymakers around the world. With its traditional value of living in harmony with nature, as well as its science and technology, Japan has been active in international cooperation in NbS, which is the main theme of today's seminar. As many of you know, NbS have diverse benefits when implemented as climate change countermeasures. In today's seminar, experts and practitioners conducting NbS on the ground are going to discuss the multiple benefits of NbS in regard to various social issues, as well as the challenges we face in the field, while also introducing international trends and good practices. NbS is a key initiative in the implementation of the new global biodiversity framework that will be adopted at the CBD COP15, as it will also be a crucial element towards 30 by 30, which aims to conserve or protect at least 30% of global land and oceans by 2030. NbS is expected to become more and more important in the future. We believe that the Satuyama Initiative, which Japan has been promoting for many years, will also play a role in NbS from the perspective of promoting sustainable production and consumption by using local natural resources. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shoda, for delivering the opening remarks. Now I would like to invite 7 speakers to introduce very interesting initiatives related to NbS. The first speaker is Ms. Dorothy Herr, Assistant to the Deputy Head of the Global Marine Program, IUCN.
Great, thank you very much. And first, sincere apologies, as there was another speaker lined up here today, but his schedule was a bit mixed up, so he can't be here with us. So again, sincere apologies. The Vice Minister did already a great job of introducing NbS, so there's not much I can add, but I will try and do my best, indeed, to give you an overview of NbS and also how we see opportunities for using blended finance to bring more substantial money into actually implementing nature-based solution. Yeah, I'm working for IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and indeed we have quite a significant portfolio on nature-based solutions. So specifically from the resilience and adaptation side, we have about over 100 projects in 94 countries with a total funding of over 230 million. Next slide, please. Does that work? Yeah, there we go. And as we heard from the Vice Minister already, it's really nature-based solutions are about addressing societal challenges. Here we are at the climate COP, but he also spoke to the biodiversity crisis. So how can we conserve and restore landscape, seascape to actually bring the adaptation benefits both to the cities as well as the local communities? And here you see a few of the values that have been put on some of these adaptation opportunities in the last few years. This next slide, please. Some of you might know where is NbS actually coming from, but also to sort of give you a sense of how well is this established, how is it recognized within the global community. So indeed, in the last 3 years, whether it was at the UN Action Summit or we see it now more prominently showing up in NDCs. For example, Chile had a very supportive NDC on nature-based solutions. I'm coming from the marine world, so I know, for example, Belize and Seychelles and others really took up this opportunity for nature-based solutions in their NDCs, both from an adaptation and to some degree also for a mitigation point of view. And actually, you know, there is this, again, this combination between biodiversity and climate. We have technical workings group like the IPBES and IPBC who really try to address this topic of implementation as well across the climate and the biodiversity crisis. Next slide, please. And it's not just the recognition, but indeed the demand, whether it is on the government level, but also on the private level. And maybe here, moving over to the topic more of finance. We see whether it is sort of in the more academic world, looking at what are financial innovative mechanisms, what are opportunities, but also from big businesses that do want to invest into nature-based solutions, that there is an increased sort of interest and really sort of making financial flows available and putting them into implementation. But of course, that also comes with a certain risk to some degree. What is an NbS? How do we define it? And how can we make sure it's actually delivering on the ground and not being used for some sort of greenwashing exercise? Next slide, please. And indeed, many of you might be familiar with the IUCN definition on nature-based solution, which is about action to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystem to address a societal challenge. And here at this stage, it might also be useful to say what is not an NbS. A wind farm in itself is not an NbS. A wind farm is a nature-derived solution. We need wind farms, but it's not an NbS. Similarly, biomimicry type exercises that we see in architecture or otherwise, those are not NbS unless we really integrate the active conservation or restoration of ecosystem in these type of projects. Next slide, please. Oh, can you click through until we have the full slide? Yeah, this is just again to give you a sense that there was quite a large consultation happening to get the NbS standard, which was launched last year, which is based on 8 criteria and 28 indicators. It's a facilitative standard, so it's a self-assessment tool to help project developers, program developers to actually see how well they are scoring on nature-based solutions. And indeed, a few weeks ago, IUCN also announced that we are launching a certification process with some of the ICL members like the gold standard to actually see how NbS can be certified through a third-party verifier and to again give credibility to some of these actions primarily vis-a-vis the private sector. Next slide, please. How are we also, the various ways of how IUCN works on nature-based solution. Also last year, we initiated the IUCN Global Facility, which has 3 main hubs around finance, knowledge and innovation, and the policy enabler. There is a lot of work also on capacity building, whether it is on the more local level or on sort of larger scale effort, for example, with multilateral development banks. There's a great interest happening on, again, applying NbS from the get-go into different infrastructure design mechanisms, for example. Here, we just listed a few of the mechanisms that we currently have, and we know they're more in the making, also specifically in areas like the Western Indian Ocean. So we're looking forward to seeing those come to life. How we help project developers attract this so-called private sector finance, because there's a lot of high-level talk about this, but how do we really make it happen, and how can we help the project developers on the ground move forward and really leverage this private capital? So we are engaged in different sort of technical assistance, but also working directly with the equity of fund managers to ensure that this is done on the highest quality possible. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is just to wrap up, to give you a sense again, in terms of the financial world. I talked a little bit about now the TA and sort of leveraging private sector finance, but of course there is a broader effort ongoing also with the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility. So how do we scale up there the contributions from mechanisms like that into nature-based solutions? But it's also the question, how does the governments can set the right incentives to really move ahead and spearheading and channeling nature-based solutions and the money, both philanthropic, public as well as private sector, into these new innovations. And really ultimately what we do want is again measuring the positive impacts on the ground for nature, for people, and how do we bring this sort of different avenues together to really make it happen. And again, from ICN side, we're both working on technical guidances, for example, how can we use blue bonds, but also how do we work with the regulatory environment around, for example, the EU taxonomy, where again nature-based solution is part of the discussion. So happy to take any questions afterward, but I hope that gave you a first insight. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Har, for framing today's discussion by introducing the global trend of NbS. Now I would like to invite Dr. Noriaki Sakaguchi, Senior Advisor, Global Environmental Department, Japan International Cooperation Agency. Dr. Sakaguchi, over to you.
Thank you, Matsuo-san. Can you hear me? Okay. So I would like to express special thanks to Ministry of Environment for having me to this important seminar. Now I'm joining from Palau, JICA office. Today, let me share with you about JICA's approach on coastal ecosystem management for ensure its multiple benefits and climate change adaptation through nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. Coastal ecosystems provide multiple ecosystem services for people. In developing countries, people living in coastal areas are highly dependent on their ecosystem services. When we look at coral reef, we can find a variety of benefits, such as providing fishery resources. Coastal reef is covering only less than 0.1% of marine area, but home to 25% of all non-marine species. Well-managed reef can provide 5 to 15 tons of seafood per square kilometer per year. Coastal reef also provide tourism resources. Estimated its economic value for tourism is more than $1 million per hectare per year in maximum. Third, coral reef is significant for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. Coral reef effectively reduces storm wave by big typhoon predicted by climate change. Reef reduces 84% of wave height as shown to the figure right below. Next slide, please. Mangrove ecosystem also provides multiple benefits, including providing fishery resources. It's inhabited by a variety of fishes and crustaceans and providing them with spawning and nursery sites. Mangroves are important for climate change mitigation, sequestering carbon underground with much higher rates than terrestrial forests, as shown to the figure upper right. It's also essential for climate change adaptation, weakening storm waves and preventing beach erosion. Mangrove forests play a crucial role for disaster risk reduction. Mangroves weaken tsunami height and energy as well as coral reef. The figure right below shows tsunami reduction effect for different ages of mangrove forest according to tsunami height. Mangrove forests reduce tsunami height for less than 4 meters height with a rate of 0.2 to 0.3. Next slide, please. However, coral reefs and mangroves have been declining rapidly by climate change and other anthropogenic impacts. Approximately half the live coral cover has been lost in the last 150 years due to climate change interacting with other drivers. Due to the figure upper right shows change in red list indices for each taxonomic group. The indices of coral has declined with the steepest rate. Total mangrove area in the world has rapidly declined with 0.17 million hectares per year for 1980 to 2000, then slowed for 2000 to 2020. Main cause of the decline is due to sea use change such as conversion to shrimp ponds. Next slide, please. In Japan, suffering typhoons and tsunami frequently to protect from such disaster, large scale of seawalls have been constructed. Such large infrastructure can protect from hazards with a certain level. Instead, in tropical areas, it damages mangrove and coral reef ecosystems and reduces fishery resources and other services. It causes trade-off relationship. In developing countries, people living in coastal areas highly depend on fishery resources, and it's often difficult to secure the budget for construction and maintenance of large scale of seawalls. Considering such situation in developing countries, NbS could be an effective approach to secure multi-benefits from ecosystems and resilience to climate change and natural disasters. Of course, hard infrastructure is essential to protect from large scale of tsunami and typhoon. Combination of NbS and hard infrastructure such as setback construction of seawall behind mangroves could be effective to reduce damage to coastal ecosystem and enables to install a smaller scale seawall thanks to coral reef and mangrove, reducing storm wave and tsunami energy. Next slide, please. Coastal ecosystem is degraded by multiple drivers simultaneously. This is the case in Mauritius in 2020 when we researched ship grounding impacts. Coral reef was damaged not only by oil spill but also by bleaching, by sea temperature rise, predation by ancestors, and sedimentation. Ecosystem-based integrated coastal management is essential to address multiple drivers and secure multiple ecosystem services and resilience to climate change. Concretely, develop integrated management system by participation and collaboration of stakeholders. Second, planning and implementation of measures to address threats. Third, adaptive management based on scientific information. Next slide, please. Finally, let me introduce a project with Palau. JICA has a long history on cooperation with Palau for coastal ecosystem conservation. Established Palau International Coral Reef Center, PICRUC, in 2001, then conducted cooperation project with PICRUC for coral reef monitoring and conservation. Coastal ecosystems in Palau are also threatened by multiple drivers, including climate change events, soil runoff by land use change, and pollution. In order to secure resilience to climate change, project aims to enhance integrated coastal ecosystem management, considering the connectivity between territorial and coastal area. Project framework consists of developed coastal ecosystem management committee, monitoring coastal ecosystems, support conservation and sustainable use, and SEPA. Those threats to coastal ecosystem found in Palau are common to small island developing states. Therefore, we believe our approach in Palau and Mauritius can be applicable to other SIDs. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sakaguchi, for the very clear explanation of the benefits of integrated coastal ecosystem management approach. The next speaker is Dr. Yasumasa Hirata, Managing Director, Forestry and Forest Products Research Institute, Japan. Dr. Hirata, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yasumasa Hirata. I'm Director of RED Plus and Forest-Based Disaster Risk Reduction Research and Development Center. Today, I would like to talk about disaster prevention and mitigation technologies that utilize forest function to adapt to climate change. Next slide, please. So recently, many extreme events such as increased intensity and frequency of heavy rainfall and abnormal rise in tide levels have been observed due to the extreme development of typhoon, hurricanes, and cyclones. These extreme events associated with climate change have been observed on a global scale. These natural events associated with climate change will affect not only developed countries, but also developing countries equally. In developing countries, for economic, in Japan, selection of area for priority implementation of erosion control projects is based on appropriate assessment of the risk of occurrence of mountain disasters and the natural resilience of forests. This design concept, which does not rely solely on hard measures, is expected to be highly applicable even in developing countries with limited resources. Next slide, please. In the Paris Agreement, which was decided in 2015, it is indicated that both adaptation and mitigation need to be addressed. Japan's strategy for exporting infrastructure systems considers countermeasures against climate change using our experience and technology as an advanced country in disaster prevention as one of the infrastructure investments. Specific measures include avoiding and mitigating damage from natural disasters and other disasters caused by the effect of climate change in the Asia-Pacific region, and promoting support for the planning and implementation of adaptation measures. Next slide, please. In general, during the periods of economic growth when industrial activities increases and population grows rapidly, there is a strong tendency to disregard traditional land use laws, and it is believed that the use of land with high disaster risk can easily lead to the occurrence of mountain disasters. In developing countries, the early introduction of erosion control technology, which requires planned land use and dissemination of disaster prevention awareness, is considered to be extremely cost-effective in terms of investment in the future. Next slide, please. Japan's mountain reclamation project have developed their own unique techniques to maximize the disaster prevention and mitigation functions of forest by combining forest maintenance with supplementary grey infrastructure based on the country's rich experience. Grey infrastructure are costly, and green infrastructures alone are not sufficient for disaster prevention. It is important to find the best mix of grey infrastructure and green infrastructure, as previous presenter mentioned. Next slide, please. The disaster prevention and mitigation effects of forests developed with erosion control technologies are extremely broad and wide-ranging, and because they don't rely excessively on concrete structures, they are low cost, so they are expected to be highly applicable to developing countries that are planning to implement full-scale disaster countermeasures in the future. Next slide, please. Under these circumstances, disaster risk reduction through the use of ecosystems, so-called Eco-DRR, is now attracting attention as one of the nature-based solutions. Among ecosystems, forests are expected to play an important role in disaster prevention and mitigation due to their rich root system. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Our center developing methods to effectively apply Japanese forest maintenance. No, return back. Please return back. Previous slide. Our research center is developing methods to effectively apply Japanese forest maintenance and management technology to meet local needs in order to apply Japanese strengths in mountain management technology to enhance the disaster prevention and mitigation functions of forests in developing countries. Next slide, please. In the development of this technology, we are also using new technology such as 3D reconstructing using drones. But next slide, please. It's final slide. But as you can see in the photo on the low right of this slide, we are also using low-cost methods such as construction of forest roads that are less likely to collapse by securing drainage using locally available materials such as bamboo. Finally, the impact of climate change is expected to increase in the future. The question is how we can adapt to this climate change with our limited resources. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hirata, for reminding us the important function of forest for climate change adaptation. Now let us invite Dr. Stevko Stefanovsky, Head of Department for Analysis, Assessment for Strategic Planning, Republic of North Macedonia. Dr. Stefanovsky, please take the floor.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
my apologies for any inconvenience. So once again, the hello from this part of the world, from Southeast Europe, from Balkan Peninsula. It's my pleasure to be part of this event today. So my presentation is related with the Eco-DRR project through the proper management of the forest in the Republic of North Macedonia, supported by Japan. So in the first part of my presentation, I will provide some brief introduction about the organization of the country disaster and the forest management. And in the second part of my presentation, I will present the project, the current ongoing project of the capacity building for ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction through the sustainable forest management in Macedonia, supported by JICA. So National Crisis Management System, this is the disaster management site based on the crisis management law from 2005. So this is my institution which I'm representing, the Crisis Management Center. We have a status of the directorate with the main function of providing the continuity of interagency and international cooperation, national coordination in the disaster management, and also the preparation and updating of the national disaster risk assessment. From the right side is the forest management, the forestry in the Republic of Macedonia. So from the total territory, about 40% is forest land, and another 60% belongs to the other type of the lands. So the forest and forest management in the Republic of North Macedonia is implemented according with the law on forest, and the government manage the state-owned forest, which is around 90% from the total forest in the country, through the following entities. So the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Water Economy, then Public Enterprise National Forest, which is implementing agency, Ministry of Environment, Physical Planning, which manage the national parks, Multipurpose Protected Area, and also we have a union of the private forest owners. So we are relating with the natural hazard, natural disaster, according to the national database. So the main natural related disaster in Macedonia are the floods, around the 50%, then extreme weather condition, wildfire, drought, and storm. By economic issue, the flood and forest fire are on the first place. So the most important DRR projects supported by Japan and implemented in North Macedonia are the following. So the first, the project for implementation of integrated system for prevention and early warning of forest fire, which was implemented in the period 2011-2014. Then we implemented a regional project in the Balkan countries, third country training program, to transfer our knowledge and experience from North Macedonia to the neighboring countries. And now the ongoing project on capacity building for ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction through the sustainable forest management in Macedonia, which started in 2017. So the project time is up to 2022, and now we have plus 1 year because of the ongoing pandemic situation. So the outline of the project, overall goal of this project is by ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction measures and activities in a synergy with sustainable forest management, disaster risk of floods, landslides, erosion, and also the forest fire on a medium and long-term basis are reduced. So the main implementing agency is a crisis management center. We are cooperating with the national forest authorities, like a public enterprise national forest, and also we established a good cooperation with the environment, hydrology, local government, academia, and other relevant partners. So duration is the project is a 5 + 1 year. So the purpose is ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction model against floods, landslides, soil erosion, and forest fire by utilization of the multiple forest function is developed. Within this project, we have 4 expected outputs. So the first output is related with the update of the previous result of the MK-FIS, Macedonian Forest Information System. Second output is related with the enhancement of the forest management and planning capacity. Third output is related with the enhancement of the capacity to carry out the Eco-DRR related activities. And fourth output is related with the public affairs. Of course, we have many activities to achieve these outputs and also the main products we are producing by the project. So the first output is related with the increasing the developed previous project result, forest, which was mainly forest fire oriented. So now we have within this project additional activities like a production of the hazard maps, additional high risk area identification of another information. Then we are developing additional database related with the floods, landslides, soil erosion, and finally to the end of the project, we will have update and expand Macedonian forest fire information system with additional function related related with the floods, landslide, and soil erosion. So the second output is related with the current forest management plan, because the ongoing management plan is primarily wood production oriented, which means that the annual harvesting of the forest and also degradation of the forest by the natural disaster. As a result of this, we have a big ecosystem function which results with the landslides, soil erosion, and floods. By this project, we are going to introduce Japanese experience with the forest management by the zoning and also the introducing of the new ecosystem function of the forest, and then we are expecting to improve the forest management system and also to increase the ecosystem function. The third activities or output is related with the conservation work. Actually, this is a combination of civil engineering work and also the green engineering work on the fields. Also, we have activities for the improvement of the national nursery by producing the new seedlings to implement on the fields. Fourth output is related with the promotion and dissemination of the project result. We have a project Facebook, and also we are producing different kind of leaflets and other materials. We are implementing our activities on the 3-site pilot location and 1 nursery location. So the first site in Radovish, east part of the country, it's related with the prevention and reduction of the torrential flood, soil erosion, and stabilization of the land. The second, it's a Lisice Dam, protection of the water resources and the reservoir from the extensive sedimentation. Third part, it's around the capital city Skopje, protection of the environment, natural disaster, and also promotion of the concept of the forest function for the health and recreative benefits of the citizens. And fourth site, it's a nursery in Svetlin Lake, which is modernization to the central nursery of the public enterprise national forest. So then now, currently we are working on the first slide, Radovish, which is main exposed to the natural disaster, torrential floods. That situation happens after every heavy rains in the Radovish city. So we start with some preparatory activities, 2019. 18 and 19, with the local community and also the field survey data collection and preparation of the project design for the implementation of the fields. This is the first pilot site. We are implementing the terracing work, plantation, and other activities. This is the conservation work by introducing the covering and terracing work, implementation of the Caliplex gabion. This is the plantation activities on the field. Also the nursery improvement capacity, monitoring of the planted seedlings on the field, summer 2020 and also this year. Because of the very dry season this summer, we have some problems, and now we are working for the supplementary plantation and also for improvement some additional methods. This is the second pilot site. Design is ongoing. We are starting with the implementation. This is the third project site, Lisice Dam. We are going to implement some similar activities to prevent the sedimentation of the dams and water supply of the neighboring cities. And conclusion, so this project significantly contribute to the promotion and implementation of the nature-based activity for disaster risk reduction in the Republic of North Macedonia in the region, because the new NbS project started in Montenegro and Kosovo. The implementation of this project provides transfer of knowledge, experience, good practices from Japan to the involved organizations from the Macedonian side. Also, the application of the NbS solution will contribute to the increasing awareness of the multifunctional benefits of ecosystem and using the nature resources to protect life and goods of the citizens. Nature-based solution greatly contribute to the long-term and sustainable management and use of the nature in overcoming the current and future socio-environmental challenges, such as the risk of natural disaster mitigation and adaptation to the climate change. The application of this concept and methods of nature-based solution is environmentally friendly, cost-effective, high level of self-sustainable, and provide also the multi-use benefit for the lives of the citizens and resilience of the society. So thank you for your attention, and my apologies because I used additional minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stefanowski, for sharing your rich experience from JICA's Eco-DRR project. Thank you very much. So now I'd like to invite Professor Kazuhiko Takeuchi, President, Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, Japan. Professor Takeuchi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Akane-san.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Now I use this slide. Can you see this slide?
Yes, we can see very clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening from Japan. My name is Kazuhiko Takeuchi. I'm a president of the Institute for Global Environment Strategies, IGES. It is my pleasure to be invited to this important event on nature-based solution at COP26 today. In my understanding, NbS is an umbrella term that covers all the approaches of working with nature for societal benefits. NbS is one way to tackle the huge problem of biodiversity loss while solving pressing societal issues such as climate change and natural disasters. In this context, NbS shows a promising way forward to implement global agendas such as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Paris Agreement, and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Japan has initiated various activities in our policies and practices under the umbrella of NbS. So today I would like to introduce three major initiatives: enhancing ecosystem-based adaptation, promoting OECM towards 30 by 30 targets, and the Satoyama initiative. Japan has long been affected by natural disasters. Due to climate change, extreme weather events have become more severe and frequent. Under such conditions, there is an increasing focus on ecosystem-based adaptation, or EBA. This concept is enhanced in Japan's national laws and the policies on climate change, DRR, and biodiversity conservation. Now let me introduce an example of Eco-DRR where climate change adaptation, biodiversity conservation, and recovery from natural disasters are combined. There is a beautiful small island called Kesenu Maoshima in the Tohoku region in Japan, and here many nature experience opportunities were provided before the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami occurred in 2011. After the catastrophe, it was decided not to construct a high seawall like those built along much of the coast in Japan. Instead, disaster prevention forests were created behind the beach, and these also serves as a center for nature experience programs, as well as the emergency evacuation routes, as you can see in this picture. This is one way to preserve not only the island's beautiful landscapes, but also its biodiversity, and at the same time addressing disaster prevention measures. Japan met the Aichi biodiversity target 11 on protected areas, around 20% of terrestrial and inland water ecosystems, and 30% of marine ecosystems, which are higher than the Aichi biodiversity target, managed through initiatives such as designation of national parks and offshore marine protected areas. Now the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework aims to protect at least 30% of the planet, both on land and sea, by 2030. This is so-called 30 by 30. In my opinion, we need to widen the scope of this concept. I believe there needs to be a shift from conventional approach of simply designating areas as protected areas to one where spaces are created for people and nature to interact. In this respect, we could focus on extending other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECM. The Japanese concept of Satoyama and Satoumi a good example of OECM. Satoyama and Satomi are landscapes and seascapes that are used for human production activities such as crops, livestock, and fisheries, where people can live in harmony with nature. Let me explain more detail using this next slide. The Satoyama Initiative is a global effort to realize society in harmony with nature using landscape approaches for biodiversity conservation and human well-being. The International Partnership for the Satoyama Initiative, or IPSI, was launched by Japan in 2010 during CBD COP10 held in Nagoya. Currently, there are 279 members from around the world. For example, in Bangladesh, as you can see in this photo, forest and coastal wetland play a vital role as OECM. The community-based mangrove agro-aqua silviculture enhance the livelihood of the communities while conserving biodiversity. In this regard, I'm very pleased to introduce our newly established website on NbS. This website showcases good practice of NbS around the world. I hope this will help you to implement and finance NbS projects within your local context. In conclusion, NbS is an umbrella concept supporting the achievement of 3 global agendas on disaster risk reduction, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Japan has been implementing NbS for a long time through Eco-DRR, Management of National Parks, and Satoyama Initiative. In view of the growing international interest in NbS, Japan will continue to enhance co-innovation of knowledge and co-creation of resilient society for promoting NbS with partner countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Takeuchi, for showing the holisticness of the NbS with relation to 3 global agendas. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Akiko Ishii, Senior Manager, Climate Change and Sustainability Services, EY Shinnihon LLC. Ms. Ishii, the floor is yours. Could you please unmute yourself, Ishii-san? Sorry, we cannot hear your voice.
Hello, Matsuo-san, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry, I cannot find my file. Can somebody share my file? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Akiko Ishii of EY Japan in Climate Change and Sustainability. Thank you very much for providing us this opportunity to talk in this event at Japan Pavilion. We are currently working on Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, METI's program on promoting private sector's engagement in climate change adaptation in developing countries. Therefore, today I would like to introduce METI's activity and also private sector's initiatives applying nature-based solutions on behalf of METI. Next slide, please. And next one, please. We believe that private sector can play an important role, especially by applying its technology and services, not only in mitigation sector, but also adaptation. So therefore, METI has been working on promoting private sector's involvement and contribution to climate change adaptation in developing countries, which are highly vulnerable to climate change. As part of this activity, METI has compiled example of business contribution to climate change adaptation in this booklet, Climate Change Adaptation Good Practices by Japanese Private Sector. So please visit this METI's website to find more good practices. There are good practices of 38 companies, and some good practices are actually applying NbS to contribute to climate change adaptation. So today I would like to introduce 3 companies' activities which are applying NbS. Please go to next slide. The first one is prevention of soil surface erosion with soil algae, called BSC methodology, by Nikken Sohonsha and Nippon Koei. BSC stands for biological soil crust, which is a colony of algae, moss, and lichens which covers soil surface in the initial stage of vegetation succession. So the companies made these BSC materials as a product. And then by spraying this BSC material on the slope with water, it covers soil surface and prevents erosion, then accelerates the recovery of grasses and trees. So the companies are implementing services including production and sales of this BSC. And also they conduct site evaluation to prevent soil erosion, which is increasing issues due to heavy rain and also intense rain caused by climate change. So please go to next one. Second and third one are afforestation measures conducted in Cambodia. So the company From Far East Inc. is working on afforestation measures working with local community. And also they are planting plant called moringa for medical and pharmaceutical ingredients. So these afforestation measures contribute to improve soil condition, water retaining capacity, and also improve productivity of the plant. So the plant was purchased directly by From Far East Inc. as an ingredient of cosmetic. And then the cosmetic product is marketed in Japan. Next one, please. And another activity is by a company called Sanford. Sanford is also working with local community and do afforestation and planting organic cotton. So the company also provides training to local communities to obtain sophisticated dyeing method using natural dye color, and also production of high-quality organic cotton products. And also these products are marketed in Japan. So both sides, before implementation of these afforestation measures, the forest had been cut down and the water retention capacity was lost. But activity contributes to restore the function of environment, soil and land, and increase the productivity. So private sector can also apply NbS to prevent disaster and improve environmental function of soil and land. Applying this as part of business activity, it will generate income for local community and make these activities more sustainable and also continuous. That's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ishii, for showing the very innovative NbS application from Japanese private sector. Now let me invite the last speaker, Dr. Peter Brotherton, Director of Science, Natural England. Dr. Brotherton, please take the floor.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be involved with this, and I'm very grateful for being invited today. The UK government wanted nature to be a key theme of this COP, and it's fantastic the way we've heard it manifested. It's been really clear how much nature has now collided in the global consciousness around the link between nature and climate change. There's a strong global scientific consensus now that we either tackle the joint crises of climate change and biodiversity loss together, or we will tackle neither. And that's why this session and all the other sessions on nature-based solutions are so important. Could I have the next slide, please? Like Japan, the UK has a climate change law, and under that law, our government is required to plan for climate change. In developing that plan for climate change adaptation, in developing that plan, the government is also required to take advice of an independent committee on climate change. And this slide shows that sequence here. So the UK Committee on Climate Change produces every 5 years a report of a risk assessment report for the UK. The government then needs to take account of that that report in developing a national adaptation plan. Next slide, please. The latest risk assessment concluded these were the main risks in terms of our failure to be ready to adapt to climate change. So flooding and coastal change was the top risk. Risk to health and well-being from high temperatures was the second top risk, and so on as we go down that list. Now, these are adaptation issues for us regarding climate change, independent of any solution. However, I'm sure as we look at that, and with the people in the room, we can rapidly see that nature has a role to play against all of these risks. But I'm going to focus on the top three, and in fact, the top two, and in fact, I'm going to split them into three. I'm going to treat flooding and coastal change as different. Could you move on to the next slide, please? So across the UK, over 2.5 million people are at risk of flooding, and that is growing year on year as a result of the increasing severe flood rain events that we are all experiencing, and that's the same across much of the world. And that has been made worse by the land use changes that have been implemented over the last decade, but in particular over the last century, but in particular over the last 500 years, where we have drained our wetlands, we have straightened our rivers, largely to create, which has ended up transferring water into our urban areas faster and at greater volumes than it otherwise would have happened. So our activities have made flooding far worse in our towns and cities. And we are in the process of a major implementation of a range of natural solutions to change that. And this is about undoing the harm that has been done in the past, I would say. So over 7,000 hectares of wetlands have recently, over the past few years, been restored, creating storage capacity of over 2 million cubic meters to reduce the risk of flooding for our towns. At the same time, what that does is to increase the infiltration through our soils into our aquifers, because a large part of the UK is dependent on aquifers for our water supplies. We've been renaturalizing watercourses. Over 188 kilometers of watercourses have been renaturalized so that they can flow and meander and reclaim their natural floodplains, and those function in the way that they have in the past. Woodland creation is also an important part of this, and allowing woody debris in the tops of the catchment areas and the streams can prove really effective in reducing the storm surges that we get following heavy rainfall. Could I have the next slide, please? Rising sea levels are a threat to people around the world, as they are in the UK. The UK has stabilised large parts of its coastline, and that, of course, all that does is to interrupt the natural dynamism of coastal habitats and shift the problems elsewhere. And when those hard defences fail, it can be catastrophic. And we heard some really good examples of that earlier on in this talk. Coastal habitats provide a buffer to absorb the force of storm surges, but are increasingly at risk of what we call coastal squeeze, where they continue to accrete as they would naturally, but they come up against hard defences and are consequently lost. So what we're doing in the UK is to break down a lot of those hard defences where we can, and careful modelling is done to understand the impact of this and to make sure people aren't affected. But the plans by 2030 are that 9% of our coast will be part of a managed realignment policy to enable the natural flood defence to be restored. Next slide, please. In 2020, 2,500 people across the UK died because of the heat events in the country, above what we would normally expect. And we know that this is going to get much worse. Green and blue spaces, however, provide a fantastic solution to urban heating. Underneath trees, we can see a difference in surface temperature of 20 degrees compared to what we would have without those trees. Green roofs can cool buildings by 12 degrees. And at the same time, these natural solutions provide a host of added benefits for urban settings, from flood management, pollution reduction, wind reduction, and of course, biodiversity enhancement. Could I have my last slide, please? So just three key messages. Firstly, nature-based solutions have to be about nature. We need to make sure that biodiversity recovery is at the heart of nature-based solutions. But nature-based solutions will fail if we do not involve communities in this. If you build a wetland upstream, and we've had this experience where if you restore a wetland upstream of a town, it will protect the town very well. But when it fails, those people will blame the wetland for that failure. If people don't understand the nature-based solutions that are around them, they won't buy into it. And nature-based solutions often change places. They change landscapes that people are familiar with. We need to involve communities in that journey so that they own it, as these people here in this photo are doing, where they're helping to plant the woodland that's going to be part of their local landscape. And we need proper planning, evidence-based spatial planning, to achieve the right solutions in the right places. Because nature-based solutions can have great effects for people, but they can have harmful effects. And we need to use evidence to make sure that we do it in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brotherton, for your very passionate presentation on the implication of NbS in the UK. So, at the next part, we will dive into the panel discussion to explore the various possibilities of NbS with the scope of climate change. For that, I'd like to invite Professor Takeuchi to kindly moderate the session. Professor Takeuchi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Akane-san. I will be facilitating this panel discussion, and I look forward to gaining insights from all of you. Please make sure to turn the camera on during this panel discussion. The purpose of this panel discussion is to explore various possibilities of the NbS with a view of climate change. I've prepared 2 questions which I would like 3 panelists to address for each question. Question 1. The first question is, how can we achieve multi-benefits, including climate change adaptation, biodiversity conservation, and disaster risk reduction? And what can we do to avoid trade-offs? I would like to ask Mr. Sakaguchi of JICA and Mr. Stefanowski of North Macedonia and Mr. Roston of the UK to answer this first question based on your experience. So floor is yours, Mr. Sakaguchi.
Thank you very much, Professor Takeuchi. It is a very important question and also difficult to respond. As I introduced construction of large scale of seawall in the coastal area for protecting from climate change events and tsunami causes decline of fishery and tourism resources. They are trade-off relationship. However, people living in coastal areas highly depend on fishery and tourism resources in their countries. So in case that hard infrastructure is necessary, since coral reef and mangrove ecosystem have functioned to reduce the impacts of climate change events and tsunami, it is proposed to install smaller sized infrastructure which can minimize the impacts on other ecosystem services. In order to secure such multiple ecosystem services simultaneously and sustainably, so avoiding trade-off, it is necessary to apply adaptive management, detecting trade-off and synergy among ecosystem services based on scientific data through evaluation and monitoring of key ecosystem services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Stefanowski to express your view.
So thank you for your question. So the climate changes has become the serious threat to not only biodiversity for the all ecosystems services, because the species have evolved to live in a particular climate condition, and cannot easily adapt to their drastic changes and also the negative effects such as higher temperatures, more frequent droughts, and then extreme weather events that result with the natural disasters, and so on. So these complex processes will more and more often expose all species within the ecosystem to the increasing risk. So therefore, the very comprehensive measures needs to be taken with the purpose to mitigate and also to adapt to the effects of climate change, but also in the same time, these measures should not cause additional adverse effects of the present species, especially those that are very rare or endemic. In this regard, so I will mention the approach that is based on methods of modeling the impact of the climate changes on the biodiversity and also the scenarios of expected development, so that the modeling should be based on the multidisciplinary scientific approach, research, and also the methods. Then appropriate strategies and policies of the responsible national authorities, but in the same time, well coordinated by the relevant international organization and effectively supported by the sustainable financial programs and projects. Because this is the global challenge, which is of essential interest for the future of our generation and also have to be a global challenge. So the nature-based or Eco-DRR-based solution for reducing the risk of natural disaster should be organized and implemented in this framework and good coordination between the competent authorities that manage the environment and also from other side disaster management, and to work in a good common synergy and cooperation with their activities and measures to not additionally cause some the trade-offs which additionally will threaten the ecosystem and also the biodiversity within the ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Rosaton to take this floor.
Thank you. It's a really important question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So the first thing I'd say is that nature provides a solution to climate change, but it's not the solution. And it's really important that we do everything we can to decarbonize other sectors and to ensure that the action that we take does not have perverse outcomes for nature. We're quite worried about the way BECCS, bioenergy, and climate change, bioenergy followed by carbon storage may play out. Often what we find is that the most biodiverse habitats are often marginal for agricultural purposes because they've survived this long, and they're the obvious targets for planting trees or planting miscanthus or other crops that might be used for bioenergy, and there's a real risk there. We have a long history in the UK of getting this wrong, I have to say. Here we are in Scotland. Our over 94%, about 94% of the UK's bioenergetic carbon is stored in our soils, in our peat. One of the worst things we can do for that peat is to plant trees on it, but that's what we did for a good 50, 60 years. And what we are currently in the process of doing is looking at how we remove trees from peat and restore that peatland, restore that natural carbon source. So I think there's a lot, there's growing evidence around how we can do this better. But one of the things that we've realized is that it's increasingly easy to to find solutions at relatively small scales, but knowing how they add up at a landscape scale is really challenging. And in fact, we've recently launched a large scheme where we'll be developing 4 pilot areas across England, investing £12 million, about $15 million, in showing how nature-based solutions can be developed well at a landscape scale. I'm sure part of the solution is to bring the people with us and to bring local communities into the solution, so that they help decide what happens and where it happens. And I think that's another way that we can be sure to gain multiple benefits. But watch this space. We'll have to have another conference, and I'll report back in 5 years' time how this has gone. But sharing our collective information about this, how we do these at scale in a way that works, I think is going to be really important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your insightful comments. And I recognize the importance of taking, for example, the adaptive management for promoting of NbS. And then I also recognize the importance of inviting of different stakeholders for promoting EBA. And also, I recognize the importance of upscaling, starting from the small scale, and upscaling is exhibit NbS to the larger scale. Thank you very much for your very insightful comments. Now I'd like to move to the next question, question 2. I would like to move on to the second question based on our discussion so far. The second question is, what is needed to promote NbS in the context of international cooperation? In particular, what is required in terms of funding and technology? For this question, I would like to ask Ms. Dorothy Hale of IUCN, Ms. Ishii from EY, and Mr. Hirata from FFPRI, from different perspectives, starting from Ms. Dorothy Hale. What is yours?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I think one is international cooperation. We're sitting here, we're talking to each other, we're exchanging lessons. I think this is extremely important. I think within the context of the UNFCCC, we hear that NbS, again, through the NDC process and otherwise, is gaining a lot of attention and traction. But we have other international processes like the CBD, we have an SDG agenda. So I think there it's important that we and also the countries speak with one voice, because we often hear some rather contradictory or at least not very aligned messages depending on which convention we are attending. So I think there it is really important that we speak with the same voice, and also understanding what are some of the risks, but really the opportunities around nature-based solution. I think the other one is as well to bring in the different capacities, the different stakeholders. So we need the engineers, we need the local communities to understand the local settings, but also if we talk combining green-gray infrastructure, which is a big topic, how do we bring that into the planning and bring in the engineers, for example, from the get-go? And I think in terms of funding, I mean, yes, there's always more need for money. Whether you take the 600 billion conservation gap or whatever number you might want, I mean, there's definitely a big number needed to tackle these questions. But again, I think here it's for us to be innovative and knowing, for example, that certain streams like climate or infrastructure, there is money there. So we need to show how does nature-based solution fit within those topics of addressing a certain challenge. And I think vis-a-vis technology, I would rather say capacity building, because again, it's about how do we learn from some of the smaller scale, but the larger scale projects, and how do we bring again in these different expertises to really exchange ideas and move to scale. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I would like to ask Ms. Ishii
Thank you very much, Professor Takeuchi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The example cases I introduced today in my presentation were applying NbS as part of private sector's business activity, especially involving local communities. So if it goes well, it generates revenue to continue the activity and also provide incentive for them to expand and scaling up the activity. But so involvement of private sector's technology and also applying NbS as part of business activity is also important to promote and then scale up NbS. But initiate this new business activity, especially in developing countries, they need initial investment and also they need support for technical study, demonstration of the project, and education and capacity building for communities and sometimes consumers as well. So actually, all activities I introduced today use support from government like JICA to initiate this kind of activity, like feasibility study and demonstration of the project. So I believe that the government support like JICA activity is very important to initiate to promote this kind of activity and scaling up NbS, especially in initial phase. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Hirata.
Okay, thank you.
Your comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So thank you very much for the question. As I mentioned in my presentation, climate change adaptation is an investment in the future. No one knows where and what will happen due to natural events. To make the best use of limited resources for adaptation, we need the best mix of gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. Among them, green infrastructure is not only a cost-effective method, but also it helps to raise awareness of disaster prevention among local residents. It's very important point. On the other hand, the introduction of green infrastructure requires the development of technologies tailored to local conditions, and the land use of local residents have a great deal to do with disasters, along with natural conditions such as rainfall patterns, geology, and slopes. In fact, there are many causes when mountain collapses have occurred, starting from forest roads that have been established. In order to promote NbS in the context of international cooperation, it is very important to develop technology that meet the needs of local conditions and to provide local residents with correct knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very insightful comments, and I recognize the importance of one voice approach when we try to develop the nature-based solutions for climate change, biodiversity conservation, as well as disaster risk reduction. And then I recognize the importance of combining the best mix of green and gray infrastructure. And also, for the developing countries, it is very important to enhance the capacity to meet the current challenges. And also, climate change adaptations investment is also very important for the future. And the role of private sector is very important for solving the global challenges. These are the messages that I recognize through your insightful comments. We still have some minutes before finalizing this session. And by taking this opportunity, I would like to ask Mr. Brotherton from UK, is there any message from the UK as a presidency of the COP26 to bring this momentum for NbS to COP15, which is held in the coming spring in Kunming?
What an opportunity.
So this is a great opportunity for us to consider about the synergy between climate change and biodiversity conservation.
It's a fantastic opportunity. What I would say is that we have seen the impact that binding commitments on climate have made for net zero and so on. And we've seen fantastic agreements made during this COP and commitments from companies and countries and so on over the last few years. We need nature to be on the same footing as climate change. We know we have to tackle these two crises together. We need a similar level of commitment with binding targets for nature. And that would be an amazing outcome for COP15. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments from the speakers? If not, and then I would like to close this panel discussion by thanking to all the panelists for their insightful comments, and very much looking forward that this COP26 will be very, very successful to move forward for the global negotiation on the climate change. And also, I'm hoping that next COP15 in Kunming will be also a very great opportunity for the global community to get the consensus to move forward for the global sustainability. Thank you very much. I'll pass microphone to Akane-san.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Takeuchi, for moderating the panel discussion, and thank you very much for all the speakers. So now all the agenda of this session has completed. So once again, we would like to thank all the speakers for your very valuable inputs. I also would like to thank all the participants here at Japan Pavilion, and as well as the participants through online for joining us today. So here I would like to conclude the session, Nature-Based Solution to Combat Climate Change and Their Diverse Benefits, organized by the Ministry of the Environment, Japan. So have a great rest of the day or the evening, and good night for participants from Japan. I know it's really late at night in Japan, so thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.